Big welcome, Sat Sri Akal, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, to all our amazing participants who have joined today and attendees. Thank you very much, and welcome to one of the first of many of Sarbat's Gup-shup. And for those who don't know Gup-shup, what it means chit-chat. And in these series of chit-chats, we hope to present a series of amazing activists, people who are willing to share their journey and their life experience with us. Before I go any further, let me introduce myself. My name is Gurchaten Sandhu, and for those who know me, Nanoo. I am a Sarbat volunteer. As well as being a Sarbat volunteer, I work on non-discrimination at the United Nations Specialized Agency, ILO, and I'm also the president of UN Globe, the LGBTI staff network of the UN. And so what is Sarbat? Because we have many newcomers today who have never been in this space. So Sarbat is a volunteer group addressing LGBTI issues from a Sikh perspective. We empower our members and our allies to encourage discussions to tackle homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and build bridges within and beyond our communities. And in particular, since COVID lockdown, we have been organizing a series of events, social activities through the magic of the interwebs. And one of the first activities that we're doing today, a series of activities, is a Gup-shup with Lady Phyll. So before we go into our chat, let me introduce this amazing person. And I can't tell you how excited I am, because this person is one of my role models, one of my heroes, someone who I look up to because she personifies so much of what I believe in. So Phyll, or aka Lady Phyll, is a community builder and organizer with strong ties to emergent LGBTIQ movements around the world. Lady Phyll is also the co-founder and executive director of UK Black Pride, Europe's largest celebration for LGBTIQ people of African, Asian, Middle Eastern, Caribbean, and Latin American descent. I can tell you Lady Phyll is a force to be reckoned with. Her pioneering activist work has increased visibility and advocacy for queer, trans, and intersex people of colour in the UK and beyond. Lady Phyll has spent a decade advocating for the rights of workers within the largest civil service union as a lead negotiator on behalf of civil service workers. Now, Lady Phyll is the executive director of Kaleidoscope Trust, an LGBTI charity that works to defend and uphold human rights. So in today's chat, we're going to be learning more about Lady Phyll's journey and as an LGBTIQ activist and leader and anti-racism campaigner. We'll be talking about her biggest challenges, achievements, and aspirations in life to date. So, and I know Phyll, we met about 4 or 5 years ago, I'd say, at a Congress on LGBTI workers and trade union rights. So Lady Phyll is also a fellow comrade like myself. So over to you, Phyll. How are you doing today?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you to you and the network and the members and people that are here online for having me. It's a pleasure. And when you said, would I do this Gup-shup? I'm like, yeah, didn't know what it meant, but now I know it's chit-chat. I'm like, I'm all for it. But I'm okay. I think sometimes when people ask you that question, you often just say, yeah, everything's fine, when actually we're living in such peculiar, uncertain times that, you know, no one day is the same. It might be quite challenging, you know, tomorrow because you're feeling quite heavy with so many things that you're navigating or dealing with. Or, you know, it might just be a bed of roses because you've got some time to reset or apply some self-care.
Definitely. Yeah, no, but thank you very much for being here today and sharing this time with us, because I know how busy you are. You're doing so much work. I've just forgotten that I forgot to mention some rules, or some groundkeeping, that this is being recorded, and so if any, but just let all the attendees know that you are not being seen. Your privacy, your identity will still remain confidential and private, and no one will be captured. That you can use the chat and the Q&A sections appropriately, and we do remind you of the housekeeping rules that any inappropriate behaviour, offensive language, or discriminatory behaviour to others could mean that you are expelled from this webinar. So yeah, that I've done that because I think I got so excited. I was like, oh my God, I need to speak to you. And I want you to share how your journey, others, because I think you've inspired me so much and you continue to inspire me. And so from this, I hope that others can take away that same inspiration as well.
So complimentary, but let's do check-ins with you first, because before I start, I want to know, how are you doing? Really doing?
How am I doing? I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I just got back from a 2-week holiday, and I did completely switch off. But I've got a mountain of emails to get through, so I'm a bit overwhelmed with that. But overall, good. I'm seeing like this, I'm feeling sort of at the same time optimistic for the future, but also concerned about certain things that's still going on. And I've got to engage in dialogue. And yeah, so overall, okay, not bad. But thank you for asking. Thank you very much. So shall we get cracking with the questions then?
I'm ready for you.
You're ready for me? Okay.
Yeah.
So you've done some amazing activism work, and I think from the moment I met you, you've done some great work on workers' rights. What actually led you to working on social justice issues, and what continues to motivate you to keep going?
That's a big question to start with. And I think, first of all, working on social justice issues, there's something about my conscience that doesn't allow me to not. Being a Black African lesbian woman and coming from a long line of organising women, like my grandmother, who was one of the first to get involved in building a church back in Ghana, was very, very active, instrumental. My mum's an event organizer and a caterer. So always organising. But when my parents first came to this country, one of the first things they did, as being sweepers, cleaners, my mother was working in Hackney Town Hall as the cleaner. She joined what was called NowGo. NowGo is now the union for unison. And when I said, oh, that's so brilliant, she's like, any job you take, you join a trade union, because it's really important. So for me, social justice issues come hand in hand with the kind of discrimination that we face, whether this is racism, sexism, misogyny, misogynoir. And misogynoir is something which is perpetrated specifically more towards Black women. Whether this is, disability discrimination, any number of those social categorizations that have often been oppressed, I'm like, well, we shouldn't be seeing this sort of injustice. And I think also growing up as a young child, I was shipped out to go to a school which was predominantly white, and all they did was teach me everything about the Battle of Hastings, 1066, and Henry VIII's wives, which I can probably recite. But they didn't tell me anything about, African and Asian history and her story that really gave you a sense of understanding where you've come from, your roots, or even talking about colonization that gives you a greater understanding of how we find ourselves in this situation where, Black and brown people are mainly oppressed. So if that information's not given to you, it means that there's a lost sense of identity. And I had to go and learn this for myself and, read books and read Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, Race, Gender and Class, in order to really know that what I'm feeling and what I want to do is social justice, is about advocating for change. And in advocating for change, it's really about turning it on its head so that we do not have to continually experience discrimination in the workplace, in schools, in university, in any number of institutions that we find ourselves in. And of course, you can't do this alone. You can do it with trade unions, you can do it in a collective group, Sarbat could be doing it itself. Just by having this space to talk about things, it's about creating the change that you want to see, and also representation. So that was my long-winded response, and I don't mind you winking at me like to say time.
No.
I can talk for Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, the Americas. Just stop me.
No worries, no worries. I'm just sitting here listening and taking it all in and just going, oh yes, of course, and sort of taking that information in about your story. And I mean, I remember I grew up with first generation migrant parents as well, and they were part of the Indian Workers Association, an Indian union in Leicester. I remember going on rallies with them and taking them. And so how, our movements, how we've been inspired by our ancestors,
Absolutely.
And it's really important that we continue that as well to inspire the next generation. And, spaces like Sarbat as well can do that too. But there must be days, and I get this, and you must get, I don't know if you get this, but I see you, I see strength, I see power, but there are days where, but how do you build that resilience? How do you build that strength to keep on going and to keep on championing these days? Because you see what's going on right now, and we know that, we're on a, I would say on a, what's the expression I'm looking for? We're sitting on a knife's edge here between going one way, which could go for the worse or go for the better. But how do you keep through that?
I think that I've probably learnt that people have come before us. Yeah. And when I talk about we stand on the shoulders of giants, it's that understanding of knowing that we've got to keep on keeping on. But in reading even Audre Lorde, she talks about self-care and it being an act, a political act, because our bodies have been treated in sometimes the most violent ways. Our bodies and our minds have, been tossed to one side and discarded once, they have extracted, or whoever it may be, have extracted what they need from us. And I've learnt that collectively we're more powerful. Collectively, with a loud voice, that we're able to turn up the volume on society, making it absolutely impossible for them to ignore us, is strength in numbers. So in that, and in my work with UK Black Pride, I've set out to build a really good team. And the team that are behind driving, forward the event, means that when I'm feeling weak, when I'm feeling low, when I'm feeling down, I can take a moment to recover because there are people around me that can do it. I think activism can be one of the loneliest places to be in if you're not understanding that there has to be a theory of change, right? And this theory of change about where you want to get to has to be, who do you need to get to those places in order to reach your aim or your objective or your main goal? And in UK Black Pride, that team is what does it. And we build up resilience together because we also don't have a choice. Nanoo, when you think about everything that's happening, and I will speak specifically from a Black African or Caribbean perspective, Black Lives Matter, Windrush, And even Grenfell, to a greater or less degree, it has our black and brown brothers and sisters and siblings that have been impacted by this. But more importantly, COVID-19, which is disproportionately impacting black and brown communities, means that we have to together come together to, one, amplify our voices, to hold ministers, government to account about doing the research. We have to find ways to support one another when, you know, some of us are losing family members, friends, and only collectively can we do that. So the resilience for me is always built up by working together.
Yeah.
And I know that we all have different struggles, but we also have so many shared commonalities.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's the one thing I think, as Sarbat is an LGBTIQ faith-based space, you know, one of the things that Sikhi or Sikhism teaches us is a sense of community for your community and for the better of community and humanity, and that we serve humanity as Sikhs. And I think one of the things that when you said you talked about your team, you know, they're your resilience. You know, for us, in Sikh spaces, we talk about Sangat. Sangat, yeah, and Sangat is a sense of, you know, your community and well-being, and it's always for me, until I met, started volunteering for Sarbat, it felt for me as that the word Sangat could only be used in a religious space. But coming and working, you know, doing volunteering for Sarbat, I've learned that Sangat actually can be anywhere. We're Sangat right now. We're creating Sangat, so we're creating that team, and we're creating that resilience. So I think, yeah, definitely that, you know, that our resilience comes from one another as well. So I really like that. Thank you.
That's beautiful, Sangat. Okay. Sangat.
And this is the great thing about Sarbat, is that, you know, you come into spaces and you realize that, you know, this sort of binarity of religion can be actually taken and applied elsewhere, that it doesn't have to just be in religious spaces. You can take these concepts and apply them other places. And
there is also something about chosen family, and, you know, when I talk about communities, communities mean so many different things, but for me it also means chosen family. And many of us, whether it's due to religion, faith, belief, or whether it's down to socioeconomic, or, you know, parents or lack of carers, we find ourselves in a space where we connect naturally, as I said, because of those shared commonalities. So I would say to anyone, oh, no, yeah, that's my brother, you know, or such and such, that's my sister or my sibling, because that's my chosen family. And often, you know, we're supported by our chosen family, sometimes more than our own family, because of rejection. And I don't want to generalize that, you know, Africans, Asians and Caribbeans and Middle Eastern people reject their children, but there is a well-found knowledge that this does happen. And I think it's primarily because of, you know, colonial laws that exist in our countries or our parents' countries of birth, and that unlearning hasn't happened yet.
And I think it's a gradual process. We are sort of taking those parts away from us and picking them away. So yeah. You mentioned your UK Black Pride family, and this Sunday you just celebrated an historic achievement, 50 years of UK Black Pride. And I've seen it grow over the years I've known you. I've seen it grow bigger and bigger and bigger, but it wasn't always easy. What was it like creating UK Black Pride, and what have been the biggest struggles along the way for UK Black Pride?
So when UK Black Pride was conceptualized and then born, I knew that there would be resistance from parts of our community. Going to what I would call thought leaders, those who are supposed to understand marginalization, oppression to a greater lesser degree, and saying to them, you've been doing this for years, I'd like some advice and guidance. I kid you not, and I'm not going to swear, but what was said to me is, why don't you F off and go back to where you come from? And there was another person in the room that laughed and sneered, and said they would never, and I always remember these words, and I say it every interview, there will never be a Black pride in this country. Well, lo and behold, I'm sure our ancestors were told things that they couldn't do, they were not going to do, but they did it. So in my head, you tell me no, I'm going to know that we're going to find ways, because, our Africans and Asians and Caribbeans and we've been taking our hand and making fashion for a long, long time, and having to improvise on very little or next to nothing. And for me personally, when I have nothing in the first place, I have nothing to lose. So you go for it. And I think the biggest challenge in growing UK Black Pride has been about funding, because we've been cash poor, we've been capacity poor, we've been resource poor, when other prides have been, in the groundswell of like corporate donations and so forth. So our early days was very difficult, and some of this was funded through my own money, or people that have just donated on a whim to say they want this to work. But we were a paying event when we first started, because the logistics of it we wouldn't be able to do. But the biggest challenge though now has to be the racism within the LGBT plus community. I kid you not, I would expect, I can deal with the NF, I can deal with the BNP, I can deal with the far right, because exactly what they're lacking in brain is thinking. But when it comes to our own LGBT plus community, or communities that tell you, why don't you join the normal pride? Oh, you're a separatist, or why are you dividing? Why are you doing these things? How dare you? And we're seeing, I got a lot of hate mail. I got death threats, for setting up UK Black Pride. I was told some horrible things, and I was sent pictures of Black men depicted as monkeys, of women hanging from trees and saying, there is no place for you, there is no place for UK Black Pride. And it was horrible to, and I apologize, I should have given a trigger warning. I apologize for not talking about threats that come forward. But, you realize that there's clearly a need for UK Black Pride, with this amount of hate that was spewed to a group of people who had no money. The first Pride cost us £427.77. You tell me what Pride could cost that. Some people eat that in a day. So I think that the racism that also, which is structural and systemic, that is so rooted in how people view things, how they do things, and how they allow access for anybody else. They don't understand inclusion. They don't understand representation. They don't understand that we don't necessarily come from the same place of privilege, power, and access. We're already struggling around things, access to health, education, housing. When you look at, the stats from Albert Kennedy Trust that talks about 66% of their service users, and AKT is a charity that works to house homeless people. So 66% of their service users are from BAME backgrounds, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. That's 1% too many. So of course there's a need for UK Black Pride, because we're not just celebrating, but we've taken the genesis and the understanding of when we started in 2005 was about combating not just loneliness and isolation, but combating the fact that racism, Islamophobia, sexism, misogyny, biphobia, all of those things existed for us, and we didn't necessarily see it being addressed from an intersectional lens in LGBT mainstream. And that's why it was created. You know, and I try not to digress, but when you think of 1969, right, when the very first riots took place, Stonewall riots, this was Black, Latino X, transgender non-conforming siblings who said enough is enough. And it was about not just celebrating Pride, but it was about police brutality. It was about the lack of housing, the lack of safety, the way police treated them constantly. So when you look at today in 2020 and you make the parallels, prides exist, of course, to celebrate, but it should also be a protest. And Black Pride exists because we're not just LGBT plus people, but we are Black, we are POC people who are experiencing some of the very same things that we experienced in 1969. In 1972, when the first London Pride started, we continually experience things that maybe our counterparts or our white comrades may not yet understand. So we have to break that down, and that's why Black Pride exists. Sorry, I told you I can talk. You know, I feel like I'm in your front room with you. So
it's okay. This is what Gup-shups are all about. It's like you can talk to your heart's content. It's just I haven't got any samosas to offer you because you know.
Oh my gosh, I want some.
Table and the tea's ready, and that's and we can go hours for putting the world to right. So no, it's incredible. Your story of courage is simply amazing. Someone's also echoed that here. Is said that they find you amazing. Comments really strength and courage, and she's really inspirational. So thank you I want to echo that as well. Ditto. Couldn't say that even in any other way. And thank you for keeping that going for so many years and bringing all those different communities together. Then I'm going to ask you I'm going to tell you about my favorite. I know I haven't been to a UK Black Pride yet, and I'm eager to go. I'm busting to go, and I'm like, I want to go. And I think for me, one of the highlights, and I saw the recording last year. I think it was last year. Was it General Levy?
Oh yeah.
On stage, and I grew up with jungle music, and it's the misogyny of jungle music, the issues with certain parts of that culture as well, that music, and the homophobia within that that sort of that music. But to see him then come into a UK Black Pride space was one of my highlights of seeing that. What have been your highlights of UK Black Pride?
Oh, there are too many, but your point about General Levy, it's somebody that I grew up listening to, and the sexism and the misogyny that's rife, and also that homophobia that has been perpetuated through particular parts of music or dance hall. I wanted to change that tide. So when we approached General Levy, we said it's a pride, it's a Black Pride for people of colour who happen to be queer. And they were like, the agents were like, right, okay, he's never performed at a pride before. You mean gay people, lesbians and gays? And I said, absolutely that, and bisexuals, trans, intersex. And they said, okay. And they did it. And he was there amongst the crowds talking. And before they left, after the event, he said to me, it has been one of the best performances and spaces he has been in. And actually, he's doing some changing of his mindset. And I said, that's all I need to hear. And what I want you to do is go and speak to your friends, and your friends speak to their friends, because we need to change this mentality and cultural behaviors, in our communities. But yeah, back to your question, highlights. I've got too many now. I think, okay, so if I have to pull out one, it's we are all doing the electric slide. Last year we had 10,000 people descend at Haggerston Park, and it was beautiful to see black and brown and white faces in the crowd, everyone dancing in sync. And then I go on stage because we're closing, and I bring my team along with me so that I can thank them publicly. And I look out in the crowd and I see a younger version of myself, or I see a trans sibling, or I see a non-binary person, or who I might think is non-binary, and it makes it all worth it. And then I just come over with a sea of emotion and know that this is why this space is so needed. And that's my highlight, seeing the crowd and the different faces that exist for UK Black Pride and within it.
Oh wow, you got me all teary-eyed up as well now. I got feeling quite emotional then. Yeah, I can imagine that you see, you know, the future generation that's coming, you know, ahead and leading the movement, and that UK Black Pride is creating that space where people can just be happy and be themselves.
Mm-hmm. Without judgment.
Exactly.
Without feeling that they're going to be watched, you know, with just owning their space, because that's what we do. We are occupying our spaces which we haven't been able to do so. And, you know, every year my daughter is there in full swing, and, you know, she's 25 now. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, how could I have a 25-year-old? You know, it's the melanin, it's not going to crack. But she, you know, she arrives and she's like, her best friend is she has a lesbian best friend and a gay best friend, and she's like, Mum, I'm so proud of you. And I keep on saying to her, do you have anything to say? Do you need to come out? I'm here for you. She's like, no, Mum, no, I'm a heterosexual. Let's not say this. I'm proud of you, but not everyone is LGBT plus.
Well, thank you for, you know, creating that space and the future, and, you know, supporting the next generation of role models, of leaders that communities, LGBTI communities need. Okay, I'm just looking at my questions here. I think you've already covered the one that we want to talk about, you know, why it's so important to LGBTIQ people of colour, and we've sort of covered that. Now, you talked about last year's UK Black Pride and the electric slide, and Durham, who is the founder of Sarbat, sent me some pictures and shared some pictures on our Twitter account of Sarbat members at the UK Black Pride last year. So my question would be, I mean, when it comes to faith and people of colour and faith communities in people of colour and faith, often, and being LGBTI, they're all sort of compartmentalized and sometimes intersex. And, you know, we've got to break down those barriers between those various groups and identities that we hold. How is UK Black Pride working on building these bridges with communities of faith, including South Asian communities of faith like Sarbat?
So I get asked this question a lot, not just about South Asian, how a UK Black Pride building bridges. Now, when you look at UK Black Pride's core team and our board, it's ever so diverse. And everything we do, we look at through an intersectional lens. You know, the space is created by us and for us. And I always say to people, this is about getting involved, because UK Black Pride, I do not own it. Our communities own it. So it's about, in order to build those bridges and have different voices and have better representation, I always say to people, please get involved. Because until you get involved, I can't do it any better, because I have to understand the nuance, the complexities, the beauty of different communities. So a couple of years back, we had Anik, who is an intersex Asian brother who has taught UK Black Pride so much about how we work with, how we navigate, how we speak with, how we include intersex communities into UK Black Pride. But I always throw the question back at the person that's asking me that. You know, if they're not seeing representation because they're trans, if they're not seeing it through an intergenerational lens, if they're not seeing it through because they're disabled or differently abled, they're not seeing it because they're not seeing class because of where they're coming from, different socioeconomic backgrounds, then I would ask, what are you doing to help build those bridges and make sure that our Black pride is fused with the beauty of the difference and the enormities of our communities? Religion, faith and belief plays a big part in many of our communities' lives. And of course, we've done a lot to work with some of the Jewish community, because we have Black and POC Jewish people, with the Muslim faith, Christian, the Buddhist, and the wonderful picture that you talked about. I think that it's also on my social media because I was so proud to see that. But in seeing it, I would say, how would you build those bridges or get involved? How do you want to be part of UK Black Pride? How do you see yourself within UK Black Pride? How do you create that space and help educate and also help people unlearn the bad behaviours of what you want them to see? So I'm really throwing it back at you, because I think that this is such an open field for all of us to make sure we see ourselves where we want to see ourselves. You know, get involved, you know, apply when we have, I can open recruitment. And maybe there's conversations to be had with, and I would say some of my Asian siblings, yeah, there's some conversations to be had about anti-Blackness. Yeah. And I think that the word and the name UK Black Pride may be off-putting to some of my Asian siblings. But when you look back at history, and let's take Black sisters, South Hill Black sisters, they are all Asian. Yeah. And the history of that is that we came together at a period to look at Black in its political context, where the commonality of race and what we were enduring, you know, in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 70s, we came together to look at race specifically and the Race Relations Act and where we're not seeing ourselves. And that, for me, is why UK Black Pride is here. The name Black is that in its political sense, but it encompasses African, Asian, Caribbean, Latin American, Indigenous, you know, those from the Americas, from Pacific, who all come to UK Black Pride, but also some of them get involved in a different way. So maybe I've answered the question for you because I can talk so much, but it is about getting involved. And our board is 60% South Asian. Our trustees, 60% Asian, yeah. And our core team is probably 40%, because you've got, and
I mean, from, you know, from a South Asian perspective, from an Indian Punjabi person of colour perspective, yes, I'm glad you talked about the anti-Blackness issue within POC movement, within the BAME community. So about a month ago, we did an allies webinar on how to be better allies for Black Lives Matter. Black Sikhs from the US to talk about their experiences and their issues that they face in the community when they even visit places of worship. You know, our places of worship should be welcoming everyone. It was so harrowing to hear their stories. One thing that we're working on is issuing a statement. We hopefully to come out at the end of September on what a Sarbat statement on what what we're asking the Sikh community to do better with regards to Black Lives Matter. So yes, it's for us. We need to stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter here as well. And I think this is why Darren was, when he told me that, you know, Sarbat has always supported UK Black Pride and is proud to be a part of UK Black Pride as well. And I would like to see, us doing more together as well. How can we bring in South Asian communities of faith into such spaces and work and collaborate together, because a lot of the challenges that we face are the same. They just have a different veneer to them or colour to them. So,
so an idea then, Nanoo. Why don't we, and this is being recorded so we can be held to account for this, why don't we think about doing a bigger event, which is more of a joint collective event with different speakers that allow us to speak to the experience of, Gup-shup, and also, our Africans, our Caribbeans, who also have some, I wouldn't say clash, have some differences that they wish to look at, and talk about what does inclusion for us really look like. Because we talk about with our white counterparts and saying to them, you guys have got to be better allies, you've got to do this, be accomplices, social disruptors. Well, how are we using within our own Black and brown communities our own privileges? So I know that I have a privilege at different times, and I wouldn't say this to just my white counterparts, because they'll be like, oh, see, Lady Phyll's got privilege, but I've got privilege at different times when I'm working with amazing human rights defenders. I have a red passport that can take me to over 100 countries without a visa. That's a privilege. So how do I use that to amplify, to make sure others have the same access? So how do we do this as UK Black Pride and Sarbat to make sure that we are fusing our organisations together in a way that we are showing solidarity? Because it goes both ways. And I don't think it should be difficult for us to do, because we're starting this conversation right now, and I'm sure it's been going on long before, and maybe some of the conversation might be uncomfortable, the same way when white people are hearing about racism. Let's talk about anti-blackness. Let's even talk about the misogyny that exists with Black and brown men towards women, and the trans exclusion even within our own Black and brown communities that happen to be queer. Let's unpick it and unpack it all, so we can feel uncomfortable, but we can find a way forward to understand how we support one another in a world that feels very challenging right now.
Yeah. No, you've put me on the spot, and I'm going to accept that challenge. I'm going to come back to you, maybe not straight away in a couple of weeks, but if you give me some time and give Sarbat some time, what we can do is come back to UK Black Pride and say, right, okay, let's have that difficult conversation and have a challenging conversation as well. And perhaps we can bring some of our participants that we had in the Allies for Black Lives Matter movement, Black Sikhs, come and talk as well and share their experiences at a wider space. So I think that would be interesting as well. And
I think someone just also said, because I've not got my glasses on, our East Asian siblings, absolutely, we have, absolutely.
I think right now, we have to talk about colorisms within PSC spaces and within our PSC communities. So definitely bringing everyone in. Thank you for your comment there. And yes, I think we should definitely organise something bigger. Accepted.
Okay.
Okay, let's deliver then. Let's deliver. Right, I'm very conscious of the time.
I know, that's my fault, isn't it? I'm talking too much. I'm just
we could go on forever. I want to touch upon something that is very important. I think also why you became, just not just Phyll, but Lady Phyll. You've achieved so many awards and accolades. What is the one thing you would like to do and go back? Sorry, what was the one thing that you would like to go back and do again? And also, I want to touch upon the famous accolade that you did not accept as well. And if the one that you You went from Phyll to Lady Phyll.
Well, I don't know how to answer your question about what would I go back to do again. Also because I have, I may not come across as shy or, a wallflower, but I think accolades, whilst they're great, sometimes for me, it doesn't bring the money that needs to go back into communities. And the work that we do, you work in the UN, I lead an LGBT human rights charity where some of my organizations, civil society organizations, are practically on their knees thinking about their sustainability and survival. So, receiving an accolade for the work that I've been doing for years, I accept and I'm thankful and I'm always humbled, but I want it to turn into meaningful action that means that I can thank those that came before me, that I can really acknowledge the presence around me that helped elevate me, uplift me to be able to do what I'm doing. And, I don't take anything for granted and it's all me. Of course, I can say there's some things that I did. I've got the stretch marks to prove it, my daughter, that I did myself. But I think that accolades are great. I'm not sure what I would go back to because I think that there's bigger things afoot where people need to be recognized, and those who don't have the same platform as me, because I can walk into a room and I'm going to make sure people listen to me. Now, there are some people who English is not even their first language, but they know what they want to say, but they might be intimidated by spaces. So I think continuing to speak for those who are unable to speak with their permission is what's important to me. So maybe keep on going back to those who are on the ground, who may be less fortunate than myself, will be what I'd go back to. In terms of Lady Phyll, I got a lot of hate for this. So for those of you in attendance that don't know, Lady Phyll is a self-appointed title because in 2016 I was nominated to be awarded an MBE, which is Member of the British Empire. I'm just going to say the last word again, Empire. And of course, my mum and dad, my mum especially, was so happy. I think she wanted to go to the palace and steal back things that they had that were ours. I rejected it and I gracefully declined. And the reason I declined the MBE, and I take nothing away from anyone that has accepted their OB, CBE, MBE, it's down to them. But for me, and I can make a joke of it, a queen is not going to bow down to another queen, so I wasn't about to curtsy. But I think that there's something about the toxic legacy around empire, around colonialism, and around what we've had to go through. And there's been no real apology or acknowledgement of the slave trade, the enslavement, the forced and free labor that was received. Look at Tate and Lyle. How was that? How have we benefited from any of that? You look at you walk into the V&A Museum and all of our artifacts is there, but we still have to pay to get in. But it's all of our stuff that we're going in to pay to look at. But I also think more importantly that as a person who is LGBT plus, an openly and out lesbian woman who is from a country that is still illegal to be gay, mainly for men, but it's still illegal, that I couldn't possibly accept anything that elevates itself over the people I set out to serve. And I want to be able to talk so freely about structural and systemic racism. I want to be able to talk about the monarchy and their inputs and what they have benefited from, not to slag them off, and excuse my language, not to put them down, but to say this is why privilege exists, this is why white supremacy exists, this is why racism as a construct exists. And I wouldn't accept that. Also, I'm a socialist, a very bougie socialist, but I'm a socialist nonetheless. And again, as I said, you know, I've got friends who have accepted their awards from the Queen, like my friend Doreen Lawrence, Baroness Doreen Lawrence, and some people choose to use it to work with inside out, but I have to work outside with grassroots, and it's more of a personal. So I have the title Lady Phyll, you know, from not accepting.
I think someone said queen. So
Yes.
Exactly. Someone said decline the MBE, queen.
Yes, I like that. I like
exactly,
that.
right? And this is, I think, this is why you're such a role model for me in terms of you personify integrity. And for me, that as a human value, that is so important. And look around, you know, that it's that, you know, who can I look at that personifies? And in the world today, especially in places where we work, or, you know, there may not be those leaders that you think, even in the public sector, that are doing, you know, work for community.
Mm-hmm.
The integrity is not there, and you're looking at people going, oh, but why are you doing this? This is really for yourself. But here, you know, for me, you don't, it's not that, it's for the people, you know, and that's what's so important.
I like to think I'm a principled woman, you know, but my mum stopped talking to me for a whole month. You know, Africans, Asians, Caribbeans, we want to get dressed up in our national attire. My mum wanted to go with the big head wrap, matching bag and shoes, and be in the palace. But hey, it didn't happen that way.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be other opportunities for a better reason, whether you're going to go and pick up an official apology, maybe.
High-fiving you, I'm hoping so. Put it out to the universe.
So we've got questions. How are you doing for time?
Oh, okay. Let's just keep on going. I'm enjoying our Gup-shup.
Gup-shup. Yeah, sadly, I mean, I'm missing the samosas.
Tea.
I know, and well, I've got my tea, but
I have
Bombay mix on the sides. Right. So someone's written in saying, "Hi, Lady Phyll, Mindy here. Pleasure to see you again. We were on a BBC back in January together on Intersectional."
Oh yes, I remember Mindy.
Yeah, and things have changed so much since then. Many communities are asking themselves, how can you stop upholding colonial expression? Do you have any thoughts on South Asian allyship and what it takes to be a true anti-racist ally to the Black community? So I think touching upon our earlier conversation, we've kind of reflected on that. We have the work. We said we're going to come back. But if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, So first of all, I remember Mindy. Yes, we had an absolutely wonderful conversation. You know, I'm going to say this about allyship. I think allyship is situational, right? And in those different situations, in being an ally, you can take to the streets with us when we've got a Black Lives Matter placard, or be protesting out on the streets. I think that you can also, in your allyship, is to educate yourself and look at how you unlearn some things that we should not be holding on to. I also think that in allyship is about listening, and listening very well and carefully, and not speaking over one. And that could be the same, you know, framework that we use when we're talking about women, and when we're talking about, you know, the POC community, when we're talking about disabled people. Listening is, you know, one of the biggest things you can do. I think allyship also is about using your platform, and what you can do is to amplify Black Lives Matter and talking about all Black Lives Matter, because that includes LGBT, that includes disabled, and putting it on your social media feeds, you know, speaking where you can and including it in the conversation, you know, making sure that actually that narrative is heard. And you can also, in allyship, is follow great grassroots organisations, you know, like UK Black Pride, like AZ Mag, like Existing Loudly, like Runnymede, who have been doing the work for so long. And then I think the other part of situational allyship really has to be about putting your money where your mouth is. And that's more what I would say to corporates, brands, organizations, that if you've got money, you know, one, look internally about how you're treating your staff and do they have a voice. Look at your recruitment selection processes that don't discriminate, and your policies to see whether they're fit purpose, or maybe dismantling those policies altogether and starting. But also money and funds that you've set aside, give it to Black organisations so that they can do the work. Because as I told you at the beginning, when UK Black Pride started, we were cash poor. And we're still not that rich, but we are using money that we raise to invest back into our communities in order for them to survive. So yes, I think allyship's situational, and I hope that that made sense, because I can always go off on a tangent and a rant.
No, it's very... It makes a lot of sense, and I think it's important here. We also want to sort of encourage our members or Sarbat members and people attending to volunteer if they can, and reach out to UK Black Pride and support as much as they can. And I think, big plug for the workplace, working at the ILO. The workplace is where we spend a lot of our time, and yes, employers need to, employers and other workers as well, need to make spaces more inclusive for the LGBTI people, LGBTI communities, and other diverse minority groups. So there's another question here in terms of allyship, and I think you kind of answered that. This is more about, you've got someone called Joshi, from the founder of GIN, from the Gay Indian Network. Great to be able to listen to you today. We have many different and desperate people of groups for LGBTI people of colour here in the UK. How can we work together better? And I think you've already set the challenge. The first thing is we've got to do that.
Yeah.
So what are your tips and advice about how we can work better together?
Hi, Joshi. And Jin, I know of another great organisation doing great work. I think I did cover this, collective strength, collective voice, I tell you what, there's something about looking at synergies and our parallels and how we can work together, and our history that's rooted in the struggle is, how do I best work with GIN, for example? I think that GIN, make yourself available and open for me to approach you. And also, I think it works both ways to approach me. What is it that is in your vision or your mission that you want to achieve? And the same way, what is it in UK Black Pride's mission and vision that we want to achieve? And is there any synergies? Is there any way of working in partnership that we can amplify and talk about representation, and not just representation, positive representation? Is there something about role modeling across the piece that we can do better or differently? I think it's conversations first and foremost, because if we're not talking, then we don't have anything that we're aiming to change first and foremost. And also, if I don't understand the nuances or the complexities of Sikhism, then I have to find a way of learning. The same way I'm telling my white comrades, go and learn, read a book, pick up Audre Lorde, or Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, by Renee E. Lodge. I have to do the same thing. And that's why I repeated the words when you talked about Gup-shup. I need to try and get it right, because I also have to learn, so that we can have a conversation. We speak many different languages. We're from many different places. And, until we start opening up our minds to want to embrace difference, we've lost half the battle if we don't do that.
No.
Yeah.
No, I think it's keeping that conversation. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, well done to Jin for the work that they're doing. It's wonderful to have all these people. See, I can't see anything without putting my glasses on. So,
got the questions here as well. So I hope that answers your question there from Jin. And I think and maybe in our next steps, what we can do is how we explore and work together better as well with Jin, with UK Black Pride, and how we can build all this big synergy together. So you've thrown the challenge out there. Accepted. We'll come on that and see what we can do. And the next question is a bit closer more to our how we first met back in 2016. Talked about the importance of trade unions and social justice. Always will be a unionist my life as a fellow comrade. However, trade union membership is decreasing significantly, as in is their influence. How can we continue this social justice movement, which is more important now than ever? How can we keep trade union movements alive at the moment? And this is something that concerns me. I'm always telling people, when we're talking about D&I, we've got an ERG, and I'm like, that's great. I have a union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By EIG, you're talking about employee resource groups, but do you have a trade union? Are you negotiating? Are you setting up collective bargaining agreements? What are you doing? So I think, for how can we continue this?
So we're seeing such a decline in trade union membership, but I think part of this is because of the austerity cuts, and the Trade Union Act, which set us up to practically fail in terms of, elections or strike ballots and so forth. I would say to anybody in whatever industry, there is a trade union for most industries. My mum always said, join a trade union wherever you are. And she kind of gave that analogy that if you're going to buy a car, you would buy car insurance, right? To protect you from fire theft and everything else. So why is it that if you go into employment, that you wouldn't have something there to protect you from, a bad employer that treats you badly, constructive dismissal? The insurance is your trade union, because you're able to get representation. If it needs to go further, then there's a possibility of taking it to the grievance, taking it to an employment tribunal, or just being represented in the workplace. So policies, procedures, and processes are not taken forward without your input. If you're a taxi driver, or Uber driver, you can join Unite. If you are a shop worker, you can join USDOR. If you are a charity worker, you can join Unite or GMB. If you are a civil servant, you can join PCS or FDA. There's so many trade unions, and I think what it is that, and I don't want to say it's the next generation, I think that me, from this particular age, being nearly 50, we need to do something better and more to inform the next generation who are being put onto zero contract hours and, are being paid pittance for internships. So maybe there's something that we do that, again, we highlight trade unions so people have got the link. The TUC, I think, have like an almanac or like a list, yellow pages kind of thing where people can join. But yeah, we support trade unions. We signpost people to them. Membership is not that great in terms of like paying £7 or £10 when you think about the discrimination that you might feel in the workplace, which has a longer lasting effect, and no amount of money can wipe away the kind of racism or discrimination felt in the workplace. But it's a hard one because trade unions are finding it harder and harder to organise in the workplace, because you've also got some of the older generation who are leaving or being dismissed or are being made redundant. And in a time of COVID, I think we're going to see an even greater decline, because some people are going to have to make the decision that, do I pay for childcare for my 3-year-old, or do I pay my £8 subs? And actually, that's going to be the battle. And I know PCS, for example, which is Public and Commercial Services Union that I used to work for, they are looking at different alternative methods and how they still help those who are on low income, low wage, to stay as trade unionists.
No, definitely. I think it is concerning as well, especially with the impact that COVID is going to have on the trade union movement. And I mean, I'm as a full disclaimer here, as an international civil servant, I have to make it. I'm not talking as an ILO here, but here as a Sarbat volunteer, that a lot more needs to happen for this to keep this movement going. But there were statistics that came out earlier this year or end of last year that showed that the trade union movement in the younger cohorts was growing again, that younger people are now coming back in. And we're seeing some countries where trade unions are having more and more LGBTI chapters, and those chapters are opening up. And, what was in some parts of the world, when I talk to, unionists or to civil society, or more to civil society, activists, they say, we don't want anything to do with the trade union movement because they turn their back to us. But now we slowly see them, the trade union movement going, okay, actually, we're going to open our doors. And, out of that 2016 meeting when we first met, now there's a working group under the Global Council of Unions that these trade unions together to work on LGBTI issues. So, watch out for this space, I'd say, on keep it in that movement. Okay, we've got one last question. What 3 things would help to make us more accepting with the LGBTI community? Things would you say help to make us more accepting within the LGBTIQ plus community?
Solidarity, compassion, and love. That's the quickest answer to the question.
Okay.
I think there's so much, and that's a beautiful question.
This
who's
person
that come
hasn't
from?
shared the name, so
well, thank you very much for that question. I think, right now we need solidarity. Right now we need to be kind and compassionate to one another. Many of us are in homes or households that we're not feeling very because of COVID, and we're having to be in those homes for our own safety and not be homeless. I think we need greater and better communication. Of course, we need love. We need to, that it might sound cliche, but love is so important. I tell Nanoo, I love you loads. And I say that because, just to hear that, it's beautiful. Some of us don't have partners, some of us do, but we need to know that there's love for one another. And it's not about love in a sense, it's love because what you are doing, I want you to win. I want you to succeed. I want to be supportive, and I want to see you excel at everything you do because I love you.
Thank you.
And yeah.
No, that question, I mean, for me, I've always felt, when I first met you in 2016, I was first coming into these spaces of LGBTIQ rights, especially doing LGBTIQ rights at work. And I've never met someone so more welcoming than you. And I think that's helped me in my journey to get to where I am today. And I think, it's people like yourself that inspired me and, you know, supported me along the way. You know, whenever we've met each other, you also, you know, always asked how I'm doing, you know, how can you help me?
And I give the best hugs, remember?
You do give the best hugs as well. So lots of love from myself to you as well, and thank you for always, you know, being there by my side. I've never felt alone. I think there's people in my community like yourself I can turn to, who inspire me. And, you know, if I've got him hitting a snag, I can go, right, who can I talk to and help me in this? Just so out of interest, that question, that person said they couldn't mention the name. That was from Manpreet Singh. Thank you, Manpreet, for your question. I'm just going to look at the time. We've gone way over.
I know. It's because I can't see the time, and I'm going to be late for the next thing. They say that you know, we're always late, but I'm not. I just think everyone's always early. Yeah.
Exactly. I like that. I'm going to steal that. It's not I'm late, you're early. We'll use that. We've kept you for. Is there anything you want to share with us today before we close this Gup-shup?
No, I really want to just say thank. You know, I told you at the beginning that I miss you loads, and, you know, it's so nice to connect. And thank you for inviting me. You know, I think this answers part of the question: what am I to build bridges with? You know, our South Asian community. Well, I'm here because I want to learn, I want to unlearn, but I also want to be part of the community if I'm allowed to have that space, only when the time is right. Spaces that are not for me, but when invited into it, I want to take part and participate and see you as chosen family. So no, just thank you very much for inviting me. And I've seen this conversation as transformational for me, and something I can now go away with and feel that my heart feels full.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you very much. And I thank you for sharing your time with us today. I mean, I have to tell you the truth. I mean, I think, and I'm sure that we'll confirm this as well. One of the first reasons when I joined Sarbat as a volunteer, when I said, you know, we need to reach out to UK Black Pride, we need to have Lady Phyll. I think this is one of the reasons that I'm actually here on volunteering for Sarbat, was to say, right, we need to get to give you a platform and to make sure your journey is shared with so many people. So thank you again, Phyll, for sharing your time. I know how busy and in demand you are.
I didn't even mention my Vogue edition, you know, me being in Vogue. Oh, how could you do that and not mention
I know, I didn't mention the Glow Pride Power List. I didn't mention the Vogue. I didn't get to mention, you know, last year, what was it? Whoopi Goldberg. Get you a big shout out. You get to meet the cast of, New York.
Accolades are not really anything unless it's changed our communities, right?
Yeah. And you really have. I think you've been one of the most powerful forces that have been on. Just to see a Black lesbian woman on the cover of Gay Times. It was Gay Times, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, well, that in itself was just like legendary. It's like, did it, you know?
Don't forget the Gaysian edition.
Yes, there was.
Powerful.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And so that there are people like yourself that are paving the way for, you know, for our community to come forward, and that change is happening. I definitely see it. These conversations are emerging, and I think that's the blessing of COVID. I mean, imagine if COVID didn't happen, would this conversation be taking place? You know, we'd be so busy in our lives and our day to day that we couldn't have this. So I want to say a heartfelt thank you. I want to remind everyone, you know, Sarbat has been supporting UK Black Pride for many, many years. We'll continue to do that. You've set the challenge. We will come back to you, Lady Phyll, on
how we connect and fuse
this and take this a bit bigger, and, you know, have that, unpick that difficult conversation and have that very difficult conversation in a space and create that safe space. So how we're going to do that as well. So definitely we'll come back. I'll speak to other volunteers and see what we can do.
Sarbat, thank you.